Kansas Territory, 1875. The frontier sun beat down on Fort Dodge with unforgiving intensity, turning the main street into a river of dust and broken promises. Fires at distant homesteads had painted the sky a hazy orange for days now, a grim reminder that the West gave nothing freely and took whatever it pleased. Through this haze rode Flint Donovan, a young man of 26 who had learned early that in this unforgiving land, attachment was just another word for heartache. His lean frame sat easy in the saddle, hands calloused from years of rope and reins. Though young, his eyes carried the weathered look of a man who'd buried more friends than he cared to count. A light stubble shadowed his strong jaw, and beneath his dust-covered Stetson, keen blue eyes surveyed the town with habitual wariness. The Winchester rifle secured to his saddle had become as much a part of him as his right arm, necessary for survival, not a choice. "Trust gets you killed out here," Flint muttered to his horse as they approached the livery. "Lone wolves live longest." It was a mantra he'd adopted after watching his father die defending their small ranch from raiders 5 years ago. The memory of his mother's subsequent grief, how it had hollowed her out until pneumonia finally claimed what was left, only reinforced his conviction. The frontier demanded solitude. Connection was a luxury for the East for civilization. Out here it was a weakness predators could smell. What Flint wanted was simple, to earn enough from this cattle drive to buy back his father's land. What he told himself he didn't need was the very thing that occasionally haunted his dreams, the sound of laughter in an empty house, the warmth of a hand that wasn't just shaking on a business deal. After securing his horse at the livery with instructions for a good rub-down and extra feed, Flint headed toward the Silver Dollar Saloon. Payment for the cattle drive burned a hole in his pocket, and a man deserved at least one night of comfort before heading back out into the wilderness. One night to pretend the emptiness didn't follow him like a shadow. Inside the Silver Dollar, piano notes competed with raucous laughter and the clink of glasses. The familiar sense of whiskey, tobacco, and sweat enveloped him as he stepped through the batwing doors. Flint nodded to the barkeep and slid a coin across the counter. Whiskey, the kind that doesn't blind a man. The barkeep chuckled, been saving the good stuff for paying customers. Cattle drive went well. Well enough, Flint's response was clipped, discouraging further conversation. He took the amber liquid and turned to survey the room, a habit born of necessity rather than interest. That's when he saw her. She sat at a small table in the corner, a vision so out of place in the rough saloon that Flint momentarily questioned his senses. 22 years of age if a day, with chestnut hair falling in gentle waves past her shoulders, she wore a modest blue dress that somehow managed to be both practical and becoming. Unlike the saloon girls with their garish makeup and forced smiles, her features were natural, striking in their unadorned beauty. She sat with perfect posture, hands folded neatly on a leather-bound book, looking for all the world like she had wandered out of a Boston parlor and into this frontier hell by accident. A protective instinct Flint didn't know he possessed surged within him. A woman like her shouldn't be alone in a place like this. At that moment, a drunken miner stumbled toward her table, leering with obvious intent. The woman's eyes, a clear, intelligent hazel, widened slightly, but her composure remained intact. Flint moved before he could think better of it, intercepting the miner with a firm hand on his shoulder. "The lady's not interested," he said quietly, his voice carrying an edge that needed no elaboration. The miner looked ready to argue until he caught sight of Flint's face and the resolute set of his jaw. With a muttered curse, he shuffled back toward the bar. Flint tipped his hat to the woman, intending to return to his drink in solitude when she spoke. "Thank you, sir, though I assure you I was prepared to handle the situation." Her voice carried the refined notes of Eastern education, but beneath it lay something sturdy, something frontier-forged. "No doubt," Flint replied, surprised to find himself smiling slightly, "but sometimes it's easier when there are two of us." "Won't you join me?" she asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "I find myself in need of conversation that doesn't revolve around mining claims or cattle prices." Against every instinct that had kept him alive and alone these past years, Flint found himself sitting down. "Flint Donovan," he offered, removing his hat. "Katherine Valentin," she responded with a small smile that transformed her face from merely beautiful to something that caught painfully in Flint's chest. "Most call me Kate." "What brings a lady like yourself to Fort Dodge, Miss Valentin?" Flint asked, genuinely curious. Women of her apparent refinement were rare in Kansas territory, especially unaccompanied. Kate's smile dimmed slightly. Necessity, Mr. Donovan. My father passed away 3 months ago, leaving me his claim to a parcel of land near the Arkansas River. I've come to assess its value and determine whether to sell it or, she hesitated, or make a go of it yourself, Flint finished, unable to mask his surprise. Is that so difficult to imagine? A challenge flickered in her hazel eyes. It's not an easy life, he said carefully. Few worthwhile things are, she countered. Besides, I'm not as delicate as I appear. I spent my childhood on a farm in Missouri before father's business ventures took us east. The frontier isn't entirely foreign to me. Before Flint could respond, the saloon doors burst open. 3 men entered, trail-worn and dangerous in the way of those who lived beyond the reach of law. Their eyes swept the room with predatory assessment, lingering a beat too long on Kate. Flint felt his muscles tense instinctively. Trouble? Kate asked quietly, following his gaze. Possibly. Flint shifted slightly, ensuring his gun hand remained free. Those men ride with the Weber gang. They've been raiding homesteads north of here. You seem well informed for a cattleman, Kate observed. Flint met her perceptive gaze. The West teaches you to know your predators, Miss Valentin. The men settled at a table near the bar, but their occasional glances toward Kate made Flint increasingly uneasy. Allow me to escort you to your lodgings, he suggested. It's getting late. Kate nodded, gathering her book. That would be appreciated. I'm staying at Mrs. Holbrook's boarding house. As they stood to leave, Flint placed himself between Kate and the Weber men, his hand resting casually near his holster. They exited the saloon into the cooling evening air, stars beginning to puncture the vast Kansas sky. Thank you for your company, Mr. Donovan, Kate said as they walked. It's been some time since I've had a conversation that didn't involve condolences or business propositions. Happy to oblige, Flint replied, surprised to find he meant it. Though I should warn you, I'm poor company for the long term. Kate glanced at him sideways. Are you always so quick to diminish yourself? The directness of her question caught Flint off guard. I'm being realistic, Miss Valentin. The frontier isn't kind to dreamers. And yet it was built by them, she countered. Every homestead, every town, they all began as someone's improbable vision. They reached the neat white boarding house at the edge of town. On the porch, Kate turned to face him, her face half illuminated by the lantern hanging beside the door. Will you be in Fort Dodge long, Mr. Donovan? Just until tomorrow. I aim to head south, see about reclaiming some land that once belonged to my family. Something unreadable passed across her features. Then perhaps our paths will cross again. My father's claim lies south as well. Flint hesitated, then found himself saying, I could. That is, if you'd like an assessment of the land before you decide what to do with it. I know that country well. The smile she gave him then was worth every moment of his broken solitude. I would welcome your expertise, Mr. Donovan. Shall we meet at the general store tomorrow at 9? He nodded, suddenly unable to articulate the strange warmth spreading through his chest. Good night, Miss Valentin. Good night, Mr. Donovan. As Flint walked back toward the hotel, his steps lighter than they had been in years, he tried to ignore the warning voice in his head. Attachment was dangerous. Caring was a liability, and yet, for the first time since his father's death, he found himself looking forward to tomorrow. The morning dawned clear and crisp, the summer heat not yet risen to its full strength. Flint arrived at the general store early, hat in hand, his horse already saddled and waiting at the hitching post. He'd spent a restless night, alternating between anticipation and self-admonishment for breaking his own cardinal rule. Stay unattached, stay alive. Kate arrived precisely at 9, dressed practically in a riding skirt and simple blouse, her chestnut hair braided and pinned up beneath a modest hat. She carried a small satchel and looked every inch a woman prepared for business. Good morning, Mr. Donovan, she greeted him with a smile that did nothing to settle the unexpected flutter in his chest. I hope I haven't kept you waiting. Not at all, he replied, offering his arm to help her onto the horse he'd arranged for her, a gentle mare borrowed from the livery. It's about 2 hours' ride to your father's claim if the deed coordinates are accurate. As they rode out of town, Flint found himself watching Kate from the corner of his eye, impressed by her easy competence in the saddle. She rode like someone who had grown up on horseback, her posture natural and confident. "You mentioned your father was in business," Flint said as they followed the trail south along the Arkansas River. "What kind?" A shadow crossed Kate's face. "Banking, primarily. He started as a clerk in St. Louis, worked his way up to owning shares in several frontier banks. The land claim was something of a speculative venture." "Most claims out here are," Flint observed. What made him look to Kansas? Kate's expression grew guarded. He believed in the future of the West. Said it was where fortunes would be made once the troubles settled. There was something she wasn't saying, but Flint didn't press. Everyone on the frontier carried secrets, himself included. They rode in companionable silence, the landscape gradually changing from the flat prairie near Fort Dodge to more varied terrain, gentle hills and occasional stands of cottonwood trees along the meandering river. The beauty of it, wild and untamed, never failed to move Flint, though he rarely admitted as much aloud. "It's magnificent, isn't it?" Kate remarked, as if reading his thoughts. "So much space to breathe." Flint nodded. "That it is. Though that space comes with its own dangers." "Everything worthwhile does," she replied. "The question is whether the beauty outweighs the risk." Their eyes met briefly across the space between their horses, and Flint felt an unexpected jolt of connection that left him momentarily speechless. The moment was shattered by the distant crack of a rifle. Flint reacted instantly, scanning the terrain as he urged his horse closer to Kate's. "Stay low," he instructed, his voice dropping to a tense whisper. "Could be hunters, could be trouble." Another shot rang out, closer this time, kicking up dirt just yards from their horses. "Not hunters," Flint muttered grimly. "Follow me, now." He led them at a gallop toward a nearby ravine that offered some cover, his mind racing through possibilities. Raiders, the Weber gang from the Saloon, or something connected to Kate's land claim. They dismounted in the shelter of the ravine, tethering the nervous horses to a stunted tree. "Are you all right?" Flint asked, his eyes quickly assessing Kate for any sign of injury. To his surprise, she appeared calm, though her face had paled slightly. "Yes, this isn't my first experience with frontier hospitality." Before he could question her meaning, the sound of approaching hooves demanded his attention. Flint drew his Winchester from its saddle holster and motioned for Kate to stay behind him. "Well now, what do we have here?" a rough voice called from the ridge above them. "Looks like we found ourselves some trespassers, boys." 3 riders appeared at the edge of the ravine, the same men from the saloon. The leader, a weather-beaten man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, trained his rifle casually in their direction. "This is open territory," Flint replied evenly, his rifle not quite pointed at the men but ready to be. "We're just passing through." The scarred man chuckled. "That's so. Because word is the Valentin girl is coming to claim her daddy's stake. That be you, miss, wouldn't it?" Kate stepped forward, ignoring Flint's attempt to keep her behind him. "I'm Katherine Valentin. That land was legally claimed by my father." "Legal don't mean much out here," the man replied. "And that particular piece of ground, well, let's just say there's been some local interest in it." Flint's mind worked quickly. This wasn't random harassment. These men knew specifically who Kate was and where she was headed. That suggested someone had sent them, someone with a vested interest in her father's land. "We don't want trouble," Flint said, his voice deceptively calm, "but I won't hesitate to defend Miss Valentin if necessary." The scarred man assessed Flint with narrowed eyes. 1 gun against 3. "Those aren't favorable odds, cowboy." "I've faced worse," Flint replied, the steel in his voice unmistakable. A tense silence stretched between them, broken only by the nervous shuffling of horses. Finally, the scarred man laughed. "You've got grit, I'll give you that. Tell you what, we'll let you pass today, but that land ain't gonna be yours for long, miss. Some claims just ain't meant to be kept." He tipped his hat mockingly. "Good day to you both." The riders turned and disappeared over the ridge, but Flint kept his rifle ready until the sound of their hooves had faded completely. Kate released a shaky breath. "I suspect this journey may be more complicated than I anticipated." Flint turned to her, his expression grave. Those men were sent to intimidate you. Someone doesn't want you claiming that land. Yes, I gathered as much. She met his gaze steadily. The question is who and why. That's what we need to find out. Flint hesitated, then added, Miss Valentin, Kate, it might be best if you return to Fort Dodge. I can scout the land claim for you. Kate's chin lifted slightly in defiance. Absolutely not. This is my responsibility, my inheritance. I won't be frightened away by bullies. It's not just about being frightened, Flint argued. Those men will be back, and next time they might not stop at threats. All the more reason for us to understand what we're dealing with, she countered. Besides, Mr. Donovan, you yourself are under no obligation to continue. This isn't your fight. Flint ran a hand through his hair in frustration. The sensible course would be to escort her back to town and continue his journey south alone. That had been his plan all along, solitary, safe, uncomplicated. Instead, he heard himself saying, I'm not in the habit of leaving people to face danger alone. We'll continue, but we'll need to be cautious. The smile Kate gave him then was like sunrise breaking over the prairie. Thank you, Flint. The sound of his given name on her lips did something alarming to his resolve to remain detached. They remounted and continued south, more alert now, taking a less direct route that offered better cover. By mid-afternoon, they crested a gentle hill and looked down on a verdant valley where the Arkansas River curved gracefully through the landscape. According to the deed, Kate said, consulting a folded document from her satchel, my father's claim begins at the bend in the river and extends east for approximately 640 acres. Flint surveyed the land with an experienced eye. Rich bottomland near the river, perfect for crops, with gently rolling terrain beyond that would serve well for grazing. A natural spring bubbled up near a small stand of cottonwoods, and the southern exposure would mean longer growing seasons. It's good land, he admitted, very good land. Valuable, Kate asked, watching his face. Extremely, especially with water rights to the river, Flint frowned, which explains our welcoming committee. Someone wants this land badly. They rode down to the cottonwood grove near the spring, where Flint suggested they rest the horses before continuing their exploration. As Kate knelt by the spring to fill their canteens, Flint noticed something partially buried near the largest tree, a weathered wooden stake with markings. Nailing, he brushed away the dirt to reveal carved initials, J.D. His heart seemed to stop for a moment, then resume at double pace. Flint, what is it? Kate asked, noticing his sudden stillness. He stared at the stake, memories flooding back. This was my father's claim, he said quietly. John Donovan, he staked this land 10 years ago before the raiders came. Kate's face drained of color. That's not possible. My father purchased this claim legally 3 years ago. Flint's mind raced. After the raid, when my father was killed, we had to abandon the homestead. My mother was too ill to work the land alone, and I was still learning to be a man. We lost it to back taxes, I thought. He looked up at Kate, confusion and the first stirrings of suspicion clouding his features. Your father, the banker. He acquired this land, how exactly? Kate's hands trembled slightly as she withdrew the deed again. Through a bank foreclosure. The previous owner had defaulted on loans and the property was auctioned. She studied the document, then looked up, her eyes wide. The bank was Frontier Trust, my father's bank. The implications hung in the air between them, heavy as storm clouds. So your father's bank foreclosed on my family's land after raiders drove us off it, Flint said slowly, the old bitterness rising in his throat. And now you've come to claim it. I didn't know, Kate whispered. Flint, you must believe me. My father never mentioned any violence, any previous owners. He only said it was an investment opportunity. Flint stood abruptly, turning away from her to stare out at the land that should have been his family's legacy. The land he'd been working for years to buy back, and here it was, being handed to the daughter of the man who had taken it from them. We should head back, he said, his voice carefully controlled. It'll be dark soon. Flint. Don't, he cut her off, unable to look at her. There's nothing to say. The ride back toward Fort Dodge was conducted in painful silence, both of them lost in their own thoughts. The warmth that had been growing between them had been replaced by a chasm of circumstance and history neither knew how to bridge. They were perhaps an hour from town when Flint spotted dust on the horizon behind them, riders approaching fast. "We've got company," he said tersely, breaking the long silence, "and they're in a hurry." Kate twisted in her saddle to look, the men from before. "Likely, and they've brought friends." Flint counted at least 5 riders. "We need to make a run for it. Can you handle a full gallop?" Kate nodded grimly. "Lead the way." They urged their horses forward, racing across the open prairie toward the distant outline of Fort Dodge. But their mounts, already tired from the day's journey, couldn't maintain the necessary speed. The pursuers gained steadily. "We won't outrun them," Flint called over the thundering hooves. "We need to find cover and make a stand." He veered toward a rocky outcropping that would provide some protection, Kate following close behind. They dismounted quickly, securing the horses behind the largest boulder. "Stay low," Flint instructed, positioning himself at the edge of their makeshift fortress with his Winchester ready. The riders approached rapidly, slowing as they neared the outcropping. The scarred man from before called out, "Come on out, Valentin, we just want to talk." "With rifles drawn," Flint shouted back, not very convincing. "Don't be a fool, cowboy, there's 5 of us and 1 of you. The girl doesn't have to get hurt if you both cooperate." Kate crawled to Flint's side, her face resolute despite the fear in her eyes. "What do they want?" "The deed, most likely," Flint replied. "Or for you to sign something renouncing your claim." "I won't," she said firmly. Flint glanced at her, momentarily forgetting his anger in the face of her courage. "I know." The standoff continued as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Flint knew their position was precarious. They had limited ammunition and no provisions. If the gang was patient, nightfall would put them at an even greater disadvantage. "We need help," he muttered, more to himself than to Kate. "The signal mirror in my satchel," she said suddenly. "If Fort Dodge has a lookout post, we might be able to attract attention." Flint looked at her with newfound respect, quick thinking. Kate retrieved the small mirror from her satchel, a practical travel item that could now prove life-saving. Flint positioned it to catch the setting sun's rays, aiming the reflection toward town and moving it in the universal distress pattern. "Now we hope someone's watching," he said. The gang had spread out, occasionally firing toward their position to keep them pinned down. Flint returned fire sparingly, making each shot count. "Why are you helping me?" Kate asked quietly during a lull in the shooting. "After what you learned about my father, about the land." Flint kept his eyes on their surroundings, checking for any attempt to flank their position. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said finally. "And because you're not your father." Their eyes met briefly, and something passed between them, understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of forgiveness. The moment was shattered by a bullet striking inches from Kate's head, showering her with rock fragments. She gasped but didn't cry out, pressing herself closer to the ground. "They're getting bolder," Flint observed grimly. "We may have to." He was interrupted by the distant sound of hooves, many hooves, and shouts from the direction of Fort Dodge. The signal mirror had worked. A group of riders, including the town marshal and several deputies, appeared on the horizon. The Weber gang, seeing themselves suddenly outnumbered, fired a few more defiant shots before retreating across the prairie. As the marshal's posse approached, Kate turned to Flint, her eyes bright with unshed tears of relief. "It seems we've survived our first adventure together, Mr. Donovan." Despite everything, the land dispute, the danger, the complicated history between their families, Flint found himself smiling. "So it would seem, Miss Valentin." The following day found them in the marshal's office in Fort Dodge, explaining the attack and the apparent dispute over Kate's land claim. The marshal, a grizzled veteran named Haggerty, listened with practiced patience. "The Weber gang's been causing trouble all through this territory," he confirmed. "But this is the first I've heard of them targeting specific land claims. Usually they're content with general mayhem and thievery." "Someone hired them," Flint asserted. "Someone who wants that particular piece of land badly enough to resort to intimidation and violence." The marshal nodded thoughtfully. "Could be. There's been talk of a railroad spur coming through that area. Land values would skyrocket if that happens." Kate straightened in her chair. "My father's papers, there might be something in them about this. He kept detailed records of all his business dealings." She left briefly to retrieve a leather portfolio from her room at the boarding house. When she returned, they spread the documents across the marshal's desk: deeds, bank notices, letters, and ledgers. Flint's attention was drawn to a letter dated 6 months prior from a company called Western Railroad Enterprises. It detailed preliminary negotiations for rights-of-way across several parcels, including the land now belonging to Kate. "Here," he said, pointing to a paragraph that mentioned an offer of $10,000 for the claim, an astronomical sum for frontier land. "Your father was negotiating with the railroad." Kate scanned the letter, her brow furrowing, but according to this, he declined their initial offer. He was holding out for more. Marshal Haggerty whistled low. "That certainly gives someone motive to want you out of the picture, Miss Valentin, if they could scare you into selling cheap, or better yet, abandoning the claim altogether." But who, Kate wondered. The railroad company itself. More likely someone representing them locally, the marshal reasoned. Someone who stands to profit as a middleman in the deal. Flint's mind worked quickly, connecting pieces. "The bank," he said suddenly. "Frontier Trust still operates in this region, doesn't it?" The marshal nodded. "Branch office opened in Dodge City last year, run by a fellow named Everett Radcliffe." Kate's eyes widened. "Radcliffe was my father's partner. He took control of the bank after father died." "And if your father was holding out for a better offer from the railroad," Flint began. "Radcliffe would benefit considerably from acquiring my claim at a low price and selling it to the railroad at a premium," Kate finished. "Especially if father had rejected his previous attempts to buy me out." The marshal stood, his expression grim. "This is serious business. Land fraud, attempted murder, these are hanging offenses, but we'll need proof that Radcliffe is connected to the Weber gang." "The gang members we encountered might talk if captured," Flint suggested. "If we can catch them," Haggerty agreed, "I'll send wires to neighboring towns, put out the alert." As they left the marshal's office, Flint and Kate walked side by side through the dusty streets of Fort Dodge, both preoccupied with the revelations of the day. "What will you do about the land?" Flint asked finally, the question that had been weighing on him since discovering his father's claim marker. Kate stopped walking, turning to face him directly. "It should have been yours all along," she said quietly. "If my father acquired it through foreclosure after your family was driven off by violence." Flint shook his head. "Your father may not have known the circumstances. And legally, the claim is yours now." "But morally," Kate challenged. "Flint, I can't in good conscience keep land that was stolen from your family, regardless of the legal veneer covering that theft." The unexpected integrity of her position touched something deep within him, cracking the protective shell he'd built around his heart since his parents' deaths. "Perhaps there's a solution that serves justice without either of us losing everything," he suggested, an idea forming. "A partnership of sorts." Kate's expression brightened. "Go on." "The land is large enough to support both our ambitions if we were to work it together." He hesitated, suddenly aware of the implications of what he was proposing. "As partners?" she asked, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "For now," Flint replied, surprised by his own boldness. "The arrangement could evolve depending on circumstances." Their eyes met, and in that moment something shifted between them, a recognition of possibilities neither had dared consider before. The tender moment was interrupted by urgent shouts from down the street. They turned to see a young deputy running toward them. "Mr. Donovan, Miss Valentin, Marshal needs you back at the office right away." They hurried after him, alarmed by his urgency. In the marshal's office, Haggerty stood grimly beside his telegraph operator, who held a yellow slip of paper. "Just got word from Dodge City," the marshal explained. "Everett Radcliffe arrived there yesterday. He's been asking questions about Miss Valentin's whereabouts and plans." Kate paled slightly. "He knows I'm here to claim the land." "Worse," Haggerty continued. "According to my contact there, Radcliffe met privately with two men matching the description of Weber gang members. They left town heading this way." Flint's protective instincts flared. "They'll try again, and with Radcliffe involved directly now, they'll be more determined than ever." "What do you suggest?" the marshal asked. "I've got limited men, and I can't spare a constant guard." We need to set a trap, Flint said decisively. Use Kate's claim as bait. Kate looked at him sharply. You're suggesting I return to the land, deliberately place myself in danger. Not alone, Flint assured her, and not unprotected, but yes, we make it known you've gone to formally stake your claim. Radcliffe and his hired guns will come after you. And you'll be waiting, she concluded, understanding his strategy. Along with whatever men the marshal can spare, Flint nodded. We catch them in the act, with witnesses and evidence connecting them to Radcliffe. Marshal Haggerty stroked his mustache thoughtfully. It could work, risky, but it could work. Kate's gaze never left Flint's face. I trust you, she said simply, and the weight of those 3 words settled around his heart like a promise. They spent the night preparing, gathering supplies and coordinating with the small contingent of deputies the marshal could commit to their plan. Word was strategically leaked that Miss Valentin had departed for her land claim at first light, determined to begin improvements immediately. The actual departure took place before dawn the following day. Kate rode beside Flint, both of them tense but resolute. 2 deputies traveled with them openly, while 3 more, including the marshal himself, would follow at a distance, approaching the property from different directions to avoid detection. Are you afraid? Flint asked as they rode through the gray pre-dawn light. Kate considered the question seriously. Yes, she admitted, but not enough to turn back. Her quiet courage continued to impress him. Most women, most men, for that matter, would have fled at the first sign of danger. Yet here she was, deliberately riding into a trap of their own making, her spine straight and her eyes clear. They reached the land by mid-morning and made a show of setting up camp near the spring. The deputies patrolled visibly while Flint and Kate erected a small tent and unloaded supplies as if planning an extended stay. Now we wait, Flint said, settling beside Kate on a fallen log near their campfire, and hope our bait is tempting enough. It will be, Kate replied with certainty. Radcliffe didn't become a successful banker by leaving loose ends. The day passed slowly, tension building with each hour. By late afternoon, Flint was beginning to wonder if they had miscalculated, if perhaps Radcliffe was more cautious than they'd anticipated. As the sun began to set, one of the deputies approached their camp from his patrol. Rider coming, he reported quietly, just one from the east. Flint exchanged glances with Kate, not the gang then. Could be a scout. The lone rider approached openly, his hands visible, his manner non-threatening. As he drew closer, Kate gasped softly. It's him, she whispered, Radcliffe himself. Everett Radcliffe was a distinguished-looking man in his 50s, expensively dressed despite the dusty conditions, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to getting his way. He reined his horse to a stop at the edge of their camp, tipping his hat politely. Miss Valentin, he greeted her, his smile not quite reaching his cold eyes. What a pleasant surprise. When I heard you were in Kansas territory, I had hoped to find you in more civilized accommodations. Mr. Radcliffe, Kate acknowledged stiffly, I wasn't aware you had business in this region. Oh, my dear, I have business wherever Frontier Trust has interests. His gaze swept over the camp, lingering briefly on Flint and the deputies before returning to Kate. I see you've decided to inspect your inheritance personally. How enterprising of you. The land has potential, Kate replied evenly. I'm considering development options. Radcliffe dismounted gracefully, approaching the fire as if invited. I had hoped to spare you this journey. As I mentioned in my letters, I would be more than happy to handle the sale of this property on your behalf. A fair price, minimal inconvenience to yourself. Your letters arrived after I had already departed, Kate lied smoothly, and I prefer to make my own assessments. Of course, Radcliffe's tone was indulgent, patronizing. But a young woman alone in such territory, there are dangers you might not fully appreciate. Miss Valentin isn't alone, Flint interjected, stepping closer to Kate. And she's well protected. Radcliffe assessed Flint with thinly veiled contempt. A hired gun, I presume. My dear Katherine, your father would be most distressed to see you in such company. Kate's chin lifted slightly. Mr. Donovan is my business partner. We have plans for this land together. The banker's expression hardened momentarily before he mastered it. I see. Well, partnerships require capital and I doubt your cowboy has resources to match what I'm prepared to offer for this claim. I'm not selling, Kate stated firmly. Perhaps not today, Radcliffe conceded with forced lightness, but frontier life has a way of changing one's perspective rather quickly. When you tire of the hardships, the heat, the dust, the danger, my offer will still stand. He glanced meaningfully at the darkening sky. Speaking of danger, I should return to town before nightfall. These roads can be treacherous after dark. He mounted his horse with practiced ease. Think carefully about your position, Katherine. This land has certain complications that you may not be aware of. It would be a shame if your frontier adventure ended in disappointment, or worse. With that thinly veiled threat hanging in the air, he turned his horse and rode away. He's going to report our position and defenses to the gang, Flint said quietly once Radcliffe was out of earshot. Kate nodded, her face grim. He'll want to maintain deniability. Let his hired guns do the dirty work while he establishes an alibi in town. They'll come tonight, one of the deputies predicted. When they think we'll be sleeping. Flint checked his weapons one final time, then we'd better be ready. As darkness fell, they doused their campfire but maintained the illusion of an occupied camp. Kate was positioned safely in a defensive hollow behind large boulders, with one deputy assigned specifically to her protection. Flint, the marshal, and the remaining deputies concealed themselves at strategic points around the perimeter. The attack came just after midnight, 6 riders approaching silently from the west, their horses' hooves muffled by cloth wrapped around the shoes. They might have achieved complete surprise against ordinary campers, but Flint and his allies were waiting. The moment the raiders entered the clearing, Marshal Haggerty's voice rang out, "United States Marshal, drop your weapons." Chaos erupted as the Weber gang realized they'd ridden into a trap. Gunfire split the night, muzzle flashes briefly illuminating the scene in strobing bursts of light. Flint fired with precision, dropping one raider from his saddle with a shoulder wound. 2 gang members broke away, riding hard toward Kate's position. Flint pursued on foot, fear giving him speed as he heard Kate's warning shout and the answering crack of the deputy's revolver. He arrived to find Kate standing over an unconscious raider, a heavy branch in her hands, while the deputy covered the second man who had surrendered with hands raised. "Are you hurt?" Flint demanded, his heart pounding. Kate shook her head, breathing hard. "He came around the rocks. I had to improvise." Pride swelled in his chest. "Remind me never to underestimate you." The firefight ended quickly. When the final tally was taken, the marshal had captured 5 of the 6 raiders, with only the scarred leader escaping into the night. "He won't get far," Haggerty assured them. "We've got descriptions out to every law officer in 3 territories." The captured men, faced with hanging charges and offered leniency for cooperation, quickly confirmed their connection to Radcliffe. The banker had hired them to scare off or permanently remove Kate Valentin from her claim, with additional payment promised once the deed was secured. "That's enough to arrest Radcliffe," the marshal declared triumphantly. "We'll ride for town at first light." As the night settled into an uneasy calm, Flint found Kate sitting alone by the spring, staring up at the star-filled sky. "You should rest," he said gently, sitting beside her. "It's been a long day." "I keep thinking about my father," she replied softly, wondering if he knew what Radcliffe was capable of. If he suspected what his partner might do after his death. Flint was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "People can surprise us for better or worse. Your father may have been ruthless in business while still caring deeply for you. Just as Radcliffe might present a respectable face to society while harboring a killer's heart." "And you," Kate turned to look at him, her face silvered by moonlight. "Which kind of surprise are you, Flint Donovan?" He held her gaze steadily. "I've spent years believing that caring for others was a liability out here, that attachment meant vulnerability. That's why I lived alone, rode alone, fought alone," his voice softened, "until I met you." "And now," she asked, barely above a whisper, "now I think perhaps I've been wrong all along. Perhaps finding someone worth fighting beside, worth fighting for, doesn't make a man weaker. It gives him something beyond mere survival to live for." Kate's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Is that what I am to you?" Someone worth fighting for. In answer, Flint took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. Katherine Valentin, he said quietly, I think I've been waiting for you all my life, I just didn't know it until now. The tenderness in his voice, the vulnerability in his admission, it was more profound than any declaration of love could have been from a man who had spent years building walls around his heart. Kate understood this just as she understood the courage it took for him to lower those defenses now. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. Then we've both been waiting, she whispered. And perhaps this land, this complicated, contested piece of earth, was always meant to bring us together. Their first kiss was gentle, hesitant, a question asked and answered in the meeting of lips beneath the vast Kansas sky. When they finally drew apart, something fundamental had shifted between them, a new understanding that transcended words. The journey back to Fort Dodge the next day was triumphant. Radcliffe was arrested at the hotel where he'd established his alibi, his outraged protests falling on deaf ears as the captured raiders testified against him. Word spread quickly through town about the banker's schemes and the brave stand made by Miss Valentin and Mr. Donovan. In the days that followed, as legal proceedings against Radcliffe and his hired guns began, Flint and Kate started making plans for their shared land. They would build a home near the spring, plant crops in the fertile bottomland, and raise cattle on the rolling hills beyond. The railroad's interest remained a potential boon, but they agreed any negotiations would be conducted on their terms, with fair compensation for access rights. 2 months later, with Radcliffe awaiting trial and the scarred leader of the Weber gang captured in Colorado territory, Flint found himself standing in the Silver Dollar Saloon once again. This time, however, he wasn't seeking solitary comfort but waiting for a very specific person. Kate entered, looking radiant in a simple blue dress not unlike the one she'd worn when they first met. Conversations paused briefly as heads turned to watch her progress across the room, not because she was out of place, as Flint had initially thought, but because her quiet confidence and natural beauty commanded attention. She reached his side, smiling up at him with the warmth that had become his personal sunrise. Sorry I'm late, Mrs. Holbrook insisted on helping me with the final fitting for tomorrow. Tomorrow was their wedding day, a simple ceremony planned at the small church in Fort Dodge before they would return to their homestead. No longer just a claim but the beginning of a home, with cabin walls already raised and fields marked for spring planting. You're worth waiting for, Flint replied, taking her hand in his. The words triggered a memory of that night by the spring, of revelations under starlight, of barriers finally broken. He led her to the same corner table where they'd first spoken, now decorated with a small vase of prairie wildflowers, the owner's contribution to their celebration. It seems fitting to end where we began, Kate observed, glancing around the saloon with affection rather than the wariness of her first visit. Not ending, Flint corrected gently. Just marking the journey. As they sat together, surrounded by the same rough-hewn walls but with hearts irrevocably changed, Flint marveled at how thoroughly his life had transformed in the span of a few short months. The solitary drifter was gone, replaced by a man with roots taking hold in fertile soil, both literally and figuratively. He took Kate's hand across the table, his thumb brushing lightly over her knuckles. The words he'd spoken that night by the spring returned to him, but now they carried new depth, new certainty. I've been waiting for you all my life, he said again, but this time not as a revelation or confession. This time as a promise. Kate's fingers tightened around his. And I for you, she answered. Though I didn't know what I was waiting for until I found it. Together they had reclaimed more than just a parcel of contested land. They had found in each other what the harsh frontier so often denied its inhabitants: connection, understanding, and the promise of a shared future. Tomorrow they would make that promise official before God and witnesses, but in truth, it had already been sealed in moments of danger and quiet alike, in courage shown and trust given, in the space between two hearts that had found their perfect match against all odds. As they left the saloon hand in hand, stepping into the golden light of a Kansas sunset, Flint no longer saw the frontier as a place of solitary survival. With Kate beside him, it had become instead what it always had the potential to be, a land of possibility, of new beginnings, and of love strong enough to tame even the wildest of hearts.